And so they range from subtropical to alpine. They range from plants that are less than a foot high to the biggest one I've ever seen was 110 feet. We'll have a picture of its trunk anyway later. And this will just give you some idea of the variation in foliage. Species do bloom, but with all their other characteristics, they just look nice year round and really add some interest. My favorite question for a visitor from a visitor coming to the nursery is looking at a plant and saying, "That's a rhododendron?" And the answer is, yeah, it is. They often have lots of little hairs. This is auriculatum. It blooms in July or August. It's white, it's fragrant. And we keep finding new ones. This one's a relatively new introduction. But you can see the foliage is really quite distinctive. Some of them have indumentum, the fuzz on the back. It can either be kind of hairy and soft and velvety, or it can be sort of plastered, smooth, often shiny, but it sure adds interest to the plants. This one's from Taiwan, has lots of variation. One of the fun things about growing from seed is that they don't all look alike. Even the seedlings will often have just slightly different characteristics from one another. And so it's always fun to look for the one that stands out for some reason. So things turned really interesting when in 1997, I joined some Brits and we headed off to Tibet. From Kathmandu, we flew straight over Mount Everest, beautiful day. And landing in Tibet was really kind of interesting. We never really descended. The land just kept rising up, rising up, rising up. And finally, we just landed without coming down very much. Funny experience. So here's Rhododendron principus in Tibet, just growing out in the wild. Little primula florum. And part of the fun of that trip was we actually got to prove out a species. Lanatoides had about 6 representatives in Scotland. Nobody was too sure if it was for real or not. And the collector's notes just said the Rongchu Valley, which is sort of like saying California. So we set out in looking for Lanatoides, and that's what we found. They were about 15 feet tall and quite mature. So we're walking among the trunks, looking up at them. And occasionally we climb a few and see what they look like up close. But it's really quite, was really quite a wild trip. This is a pass that Westerners had not botanized before, the Dashing La. Those are all rhododendrons in the foreground there. You can see one little red flower. And that red flower was Rhododendron repens, Forestii repens. Here the books all say it needs perfect drainage. Here it's growing in the midst of a stream. You forgot to read the book, I think. But as snow melt, the water was rushing very quickly and bringing lots of oxygen to the roots, I'm sure. But there were whole hillsides of that Forestii. This is what it looks like close up, very dwarf plant. And these were the porters that carried us up there. They're also the porters who turned us in to the Red Army. So while we were up top, half the group had kind of turned around because of the avalanches, and besides it was raining and 34 degrees. They went back down only to meet the Red Army, who said, "You're all under arrest, come with us." And they said, "Oh, no, wait a minute, you've only got half of us. The other half are up on top of the pass. You wouldn't want to take just half of us." So they said, "No, we wouldn't want to do that. Why don't you all just report to the barracks tomorrow," which we did, of course. And the general said, "Well, you're here without permits." And we said, "Oh, no, we have permits." "Oh, let me see them." So we showed him our permits. He studied them for a bit and said, "Ah, yes, I see the problem. These permits were written in Lhasa. And out here, we don't count those permits. What's more, I think you're spies. So I'm going to arrest you as spies, too. You're looking at the bottoms of our bridges." And it's like, these were really crude bridges. We often didn't use them. And we always sent the supply truck across the bridge first to make sure it was going to hold up. And we said, well, no, not really. And he said, I want your film and cameras too. And we looked at each other and said, no. And he said, okay. And that was kind of the end of it until we paid the fine that he levied, and we had to leave that particular part of Tibet. But Tibet is so huge and so wonderfully beautiful that we did very well anyway. This is yak pasture for the summer. It doesn't look like there's anybody out there, but actually that scene is just crawling with lots of yak herders setting up for the summer in the high pastures. We're at about 14,000 feet for this picture. And of course, the roadies are just everywhere. There's Navali. But these trips are only really a third botanical. They're also a third political, which we've already heard, and a third cultural, and a third spiritual. So this was an old monastery, and there was one monk and one young monk. All the middle-aged monks were either dead or had fled into India. But this gentleman was very pleased to show us the monastery. And this is the library. There are wood blocks in each of those little boxes. And if you want a particular scripture verse, he goes to the right box and pulls it out and inks it up and prints you a copy, sends you off with it. The young monk was carving mani stones. And when I began to admire them, he took one of them and just smashed it into pieces at my feet in order to remind me that nothing's really permanent. But much of even Sichuan really used to be part of Tibet. That they changed the boundaries. And the monasteries are coming back. This one's under renovation. You can see they're working hard at trying to put it back together after all the damage these places suffered in the takeover in the 50s. And the prayer flags are really quite all over the place, and just an amazing thing. So here's our 110-foot rhododendron. There's really no way to get a picture of the whole thing, but that's Peter Cox from Scotland, who's quite a renowned world famous rhododendron person. And he's standing by the trunk. The trunk of the big one is on the left, and that trunk is literally 8 feet in diameter. We took our belts off and measured around, and when we got back to camp, somebody had a meter stick, so we calibrated our belts, and the guy doing the math was punching a little calculator and said, oh, wait a minute, I made a mistake, let me start over. No, it's really 8 feet in diameter. And that was the record until we went to Arunachal Pradesh in 2017. This is Andy Navage from Bloedel Reserve, the head horticulturalist. And he's got about a 10-foot diameter Titiparense that was not as tall, maybe only 35 feet tall or so. But that's a 10-foot diameter trunk. The only way we could get into it was to climb up on those vines and work our way to a crotch where we could kind of sit, and we did get seed of it and have some little plants growing here at the nursery. Roadies are under a lot of pressure, just from all kinds of illegal logging, development, agriculture. This was a logging camp in Yunnan that half of which slid down the hillside after they cut down all the trees, and a number of the loggers were lost over the side. So that pressure is sort of there and sort of not, but this is what a piece of the untouched forest looks like. There's very little of China that's not been cut over. Every once in a while you bump into a piece. Beautiful Nuttallai blooming. A pre-stance that we saw. Another species that we were able to prove out was Gongshanense. This is the sort of the problem child. It loves to bloom in January and put on its new growth in January and February. So brought back seed, grew a bunch of them, and have been putting them out slowly but surely, and sometimes from a rooted cutting of one of these put it out. And remember in 2010, we had that really miserable season where the fall was very, very warm and roadies had started to stretch and we're thinking about growing again. And then we went from 65 to 26 as the first cooling on about November 15th. And I had 4 Gongshinenses out. 2 were killed outright. 1 was badly damaged and 1 was untouched. So obviously that's the one to keep propagating and seeing if we can't get that into cultivation. Some of the rhodies are epiphytes. They grow up in the trees. They don't grow in the ground at all. Cinquense is one of those, a little yellow, very nice, fuzzy, furry fellow. But again, this gives you some idea of the terrain. Almost every plant, especially in the foreground, is a rhododendron. And that's Erysium, which looks like this. A fun plant because the flowers open up pink, fade to yellow, and then turn white. So since all the buds don't open at the same time, it looks like you have 3 different flowers on the same plant. Scyphocalyx is a medium-sized plant that comes in yellow, red, orange. This was on the top of that pass. Mekongensi, just a beautiful little yellow. And of course, rhodies are still trees. This is Hylaeum, very smooth bark. When they're straight, they're really difficult to climb. But again, got a couple of seedlings of that going. And just for the heck of it, our Chinese drivers knew that there were some workers in a field across the Salween River. The Salween is about 3 times the Mississippi, often has 8 to 10 foot standing waves and it goes over the rocks. But these workers had a zip line over to the rice paddies on the other side. And for $1.25, you got a round trip ride across the Salween. It was just great fun. A Phacetum in the fog, glowing red. And this is a plant that has so much indumentum on the new growth that when the wind blows, it starts blowing little tufts of indumentum off, and they just come wafting by on the wind. And it's really kind of fun if you're there on a windy day. A little Campylogynum. Those flowers are probably ½ inch long at most. Just a pasture with Callistrotum and some horses. And there was a beautiful stand of basilicum off to the left on this picture. And we picked some seed from that and sent some friends back a couple of years later to go get more. And the pasture had been expanded and all the basilicum were gone. They said, we found the stumps, but we didn't find the plants. So that's the kind of pressure that's going on. That's what that Callistrotum looks like up close. Another trip, we got into an area that had been closed to Westerners up to this point for well over 50 years. There were anthropologists lined up a mile deep trying to get in there. Show you why in a moment. And since we were botanists working with the Kunming Institute of Botany, we were allowed in. A very, very remote village. That's the Dulong River there. And unlike all the other rivers that are muddy from all the erosion, the Dulong is still emerald green. It's really pristine territory. So we worked our way upstream. Things get exciting every once in a while, but everybody made it across except the pony man. Pony man said, "Oh no, I can't get across." So we hired the villagers on the other side of it to carry our stuff as best we could, what little we could take with us. And then by evening, the pony man realized he didn't have anything to eat. He managed to go upstream and make a crossing after all. So there came the ponies and all our stuff in right about dinner time. Kind of fun. Occasionally there's things that make life interesting. The leeches are pretty abundant, especially at lower altitude. Poor Don forgot to check his boots for leeches. We generally have a de-leeching session about every 10, 15 minutes if it's bad. Pick the leeches off each other. But Don forgot to check his boots, and you can see the results. One of the reasons people were interested in is that older women in this little village and really throughout the area get themselves tattooed at age 13 or so, because the Tibetans often raided these villages and stole the young girls, took them off. And so in order to inhibit that practice, they would tattoo their faces. It's one of my favorite pictures. These are her two grandkids, and it's the only grandma they know. And they were just hanging all over her and obviously loving her to pieces. It was really quite amazing. Of course, once the communists took control, they put a stop to that, and it doesn't happen anymore. But when we were in Arunachal Pradesh, the guide from Sikkim said, "Oh yeah, some of our villages did the same thing." So apparently, it was definitely a wide cultural practice. China is an interesting puzzle. This is smog in Chengdu. We thought once we got out into the hinterlands, we'd get rid of it. We did not get out of the smog until we hit about 3,000 feet. It's just incredibly, just eyes were burning and you really could not breathe. And the Chinese have a tremendous system of freeways. In China, freeways are flat. If you go over a valley, you just build on those stilts. You might be 1,000 feet above the valley, and you go straight and flat until you hit the mountain on the other side. At which point you dig a tunnel, and you tunnel through the mountain, and then build some more of this kind of structure on the other side. But the result is that you can do a steady 100 kilometers an hour and never have any problem. Interesting clash of cultures. So here's the monk. Notice the cell phone and the Nike swoosh. These guys, by the way, these guys are monks by day and often go home at night. Their girlfriend, their wife, their family. Being a monk does not mean being cloistered and shut up and deprived. The Chinese are making some attempt to preserve parks and big stands. This is the rhododendron spiroblastum, probably 300-400 years old. But you notice they've paved right over with a path. Their goal is to make things very accessible. I can't say that laying a sidewalk over the roots of a rhododendron is a particularly helpful practice, but so far it's still struggling. And Roxyanum is a plant that we grow in our gardens. Usually, if we get it to 6-10 feet, we've really done well. You might have a trunk of an inch or two. Here's what it looks like when it can grow uninhibited for 300-400 years. This is what the plant actually looks like. Unfortunately, the Chinese are really rough on their there we go, how they do things. This plant is doomed. They've dammed a little stream to create a reflecting pond on the one side of it. The pond's probably 18 inches deep, but it's enough to submerge half the roots in water. The other half are paved over with the walkway. So it's simply a matter of time before that plant dies. When we're out collecting, we're in tribal territory where we have Han Chinese guides, but the people themselves are very tribal. So this is a Miao village. The Miaos are very good at taking care of their forests. And this is the old village. We started there. In order to provision for overnight, we went to the local market. Now, I don't know how you decide which of the women you buy your vegetables from, because if you look, those vegetables are all the same. And I don't know if this is a communal effort or if you buy from, this one or that one or the other one. But at any rate, they were all lined up with their vegetables. And that's our Chinese guide in the back in the yellow. It's Gary paying for the veggies. And when we came down on the other side, here is the new Miao village. This was built by the government as a tourist attraction. This is really Disneyland West, excuse me, Frontierland. These are all phony buildings recently constructed. And they have, you can take tours of the print shop and the county seat and the courthouse and goodness knows what all. And it's all designed to lure Han Chinese from the East to go on vacation once they learn what a vacation is. And everybody in that picture a Han Chinese person. There's not one meow picture person in that picture. And they, I think, don't realize that this is all phony. It's always presented as this is real. 2/3 of the Meow village is being forced into these apartments in the nearby city, and 1/3 are being allowed to remain in the village. And the people who are sent to the city do not get residency cards. That means they're not entitled to health care, and their kids can't go to school there. So the kids are basically sent back to the old village where grandparents, whoever's left in the village, does the best they can to educate them. And then come the national holiday, these people get to go home to the village for, say, a week or so. But in the meantime, they're really forced into the nearby factories. One of the fun things about species rhododendrons is that they have interest all year round, sometimes just because of the trunk. This is a barbatum. It's a red that blooms in February or March and develops this beautiful red peeling trunk. Just adds lots and lots of interest. That's that Lanatoides that we brought back from Tibet, at least the seed, with its new growth. There are some wonderful shades of blue leaves in species rhododendrons. Argypeplum comes loaded with hairs. They're soft. You can pet them and they won't, it's not like petting a cactus. You can enjoy it. Sometimes the rosum has this incredible new growth with all the hairs on it. Chocolate, a lot of the new growth is bronze or chocolate or gold or bright yellow like this. This is Gongshanense. Those are some of those seedlings from the seed from Tibet, from Yunnan. A Japanese, this is related to Yakusamanum, a plant that you probably have heard of, very famous. The new growth on Callistrotum. Sarienses, gosh, if you get it to 4 or 5 feet in 10 years, you've done really well. Small leaves, soft pink flowers, and just wonderful frosty new growth. There's a whole series of Japanese deciduous azaleas that are really, really wonderful little plants and good fall color, the bright flowers in early spring. So this is the fall color on reticulatum. There's that hylaeum that was the tree before that we saw in Yunnan. Those are not flower buds. Those are all going to be new stems and leaves next year. When you do get a flower bud, it's the size of a golf ball and nice and round. Williamsianum is just a wonderful little dwarf, maybe 3 feet in 10 years, bronze new growth, soft pink flowers, grow it in the sun, and it just makes a wonderful mound. Agriforum is a new one, probably extinct in China already. When my friend Jens collected this seed, he said, pay attention to where these goes. We'll probably never get this one again because agribusiness has come to China. And that means that if you probably pay off the right people, you can have 50 or 100 acres at your disposal. You kick the peasant farmers off and you bulldoze the thing down to bare earth and then put up row after row after row of hoop houses and grow food, but everything else is just collateral damage. Cicotense comes from Siberia, and in the winter, the yellow leaves are going to fall off. The greenish leaves are going to turn even more maroon, and then next spring it will bloom in January, and those maroon leaves will turn back to green. Just a fascinating little plant. And the foliage is fragrant. On a warm summer day, when you walk past this plant, you have this delightful whiff of something kind of spicy and minty, and it's the leaves from Cicotense. Quinquefolium is one of those Japanese deciduous azaleas, rims its new growth in red like that, makes a wonderful container plant for your patio, and it's just a delightful little thing. Small white flowers, but not a big truss. Some of the new growth gets covered with kind of a topping that is probably protective and slowly wears off. But again, it's just amazing to watch these things come out in new growth and present this fuzzy topside leaf. Pachysanthem is from Taiwan and keeps this look year-round, kind of gold foliage, shades of gray and silver, and that same colored indumentum on the underside. Just a wonderful plant. Again, max maybe 5 feet or less in 10 years, likes the sun. So here we were back in Tibet, stuck at the top of a pass at 16,000 feet because the log truck had bogged down in the 1-lane road. And while we're trying to figure out how to get around the log truck, this woman just appears out of nowhere and was watching the whole show. Where she came from, I have no idea, because there's not a house in sight anywhere around. But there she was. So deliberately would like to leave some time for questions and comments. We certainly would invite you to visit Chimacum Woods. We're working by appointment, and can guarantee that you'll be the only people here when it's your turn, just to keep everything safe. And we have, like I said, about 7 acres or so planted out. You're welcome to wander the gardens, and we love visitors. So if you go on our website, you'll see exactly where we are. We're about a total of 8 miles from the end of the Hood Canal Bridge. So not very far from Bainbridge. And I'd really love to know how many of our plants are on Bainbridge, because it's gotta be in the thousands. You people have really been wonderful in supporting us. And it's always fun to have the Bainbridge gardeners show up. So
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. That was fascinating. And I feel like your presentation just whizzed by. We could listen to you for another hour. I do have a question for you.
Yes.
Do you have any plans to go back to China and Tibet?
No, for a couple reasons. One, China's gotten more and more restrictive. I've known China since 2000, and in those 20 years, it's really gotten worse, I guess, in terms of how they feel about Westerners. It's illegal to take anything from China. So in typical Chinese fashion, even our Chinese hosts just say, be discreet. And there's kind of an unspoken bargain that, yes, we know you're taking seed. We never take plants. And there's plenty of seed to go around. I mean, rhodiola, if all the rhodiola seed that comes to fruition every year ever grew, we'd have to move off the planet to make room for the rhodies. So we're not hurting a thing by taking seed. In fact, in the old days, we had a deal with the Kunming Institute of Botany where they were helping us collect this stuff and said, look, we can't guarantee it's going to be here in 20 years, the way things are going. Take it, grow it on, and when we finally get our national parks straightened out and protected, we'll come to you for seed and cuttings. And we said, great, wonderful. We have GPS readings for many of the things that we collected. We could put granddaughter within 6 feet of where grandmother used to live before she got cut down. But as things have tightened up in China, you can't do that anymore. Kunming Institute doesn't give tours anymore. And it's to the point where you're being spied on constantly. We had to turn in our passports the last trip in 15. Usually they always want to see your passport at the hotel. They actually kept them overnight, and the local police, the PSB, came and took pictures of every page in our passport and read the chip. And they're really touchy about getting into Tibetan areas. When we, in 15, we didn't even try for Tibetan areas. But in 13, when we came to Muley, which is basically used to be part of Tibet, the checkpoint said, "Oh no, you can't come in. You're Americans, and we don't like the way you report on Tibetans." And our guide had to sweet talk his way past him. I suspect he slipped him some yuan. And so we agreed that we would have a police minder with us at all times. So Gary's being the slick Chinese that knows how to do Chinese business, grew up in Chengdu, went to the local police when we got into town and said, well, we're supposed to have a minder with us at all times, but we're just going to go out and look at monasteries in the mountains, and you'd be very bored. If you want, I'm sure. And why don't we just call in on our cell phones and tell you where we are? And he said, okay. So we didn't have a police minder. But what we did have was squad cars up and down these back county roads where we'd never seen a police car before in our lives. And all of a sudden there's, here comes another squad car. Whoops, wait a minute, squad car coming. So, we always have our cameras out, and if anybody probably are taking pictures of goodness knows what until they go away. And then you kind of collect in threes. One person looking one way, one person looking the other, and the third person grabbing the seed. And that's pretty darn uncomfortable. And there are other places to go. So in 19, we went to, or 17, we went to Arunachal Pradesh, Northeast India. And that's a whole nother program. But that was just a wonderful trip. We did 13 days of trekking. We did about 60 to 80 miles. We went from 570 meters to 3,600 meters. We had 10 porters, young guys from the same village. We were all together. It was really just a glorious trip, just superb, and into some really, really, really remote, primitive areas that hadn't been logged over, hadn't been touched. Taiwan would also be on my list. I'm getting old. These things get pretty strenuous. I can go uphill all day. Coming down is awful. So.
Okay, I'm going to combine some questions because a few of them are very similar. So, Andrea and Sarah, when is the best time to prune? And is it possible to heavily prune an old rhodie without a poor outcome?
Yes, to your last question. Best time to prune is right when the plant is in bloom or just after, because that's when the plant's going to put on new growth. And if you've removed parts of the plant, it will find other parts of the plant to put that energy into. And if you were to prune now, you might provoke new growth, which wouldn't harden up in time for the winter and would be lost to the freezes. So you don't want to prune now. And you can take large chunks of a rhodie. We have 10-foot ceilings in this house, and we cut back one particular thing in full bloom. We had a 10-foot long bouquet that we stuck in a milk can and just enjoyed for a week in the house. And the plant was better for having that particular piece removed anyway. If you're going to cut back an old rhodie, maybe take a third of it at a time. If you come over, you can see how I've treated some of my old hybrids. Yeah, we do have a few hybrids. And they're basically more tree-like than bushes. It's hard to keep them into perfect round balls. Remember, hybrids were always bred for the flower, never for the plant. And so they didn't care what the plant looked like because you were going to cut the truss off the rhododendron, put it in a vase, and take it to the flower show. And some impartial judge would say, oh, that's the best one right over there. And you'd get a blue ribbon, or if you were in England, you got real silver. And you had supposedly had a great rhododendron. Well, you had a great flower, but the plant, as unfortunately you've often seen, tends to get leggy and overgrown and what have you. Last winter, we had a tree go through a big old hybrid, and I ended up cutting it back to about 4-foot stumps, all of which have resprouted. And in 3 or 4 years from now, it will look great. But right now, it looks a little funny.
Yeah. Okay. Kim Miller would like to know, can we grow epiphytes on Bainbridge? And she's also curious about the July blooming auriculatum.
Yeah. Yes, we can grow epiphytes. They we sell them in baskets. Epiphytes, don't really want to be in the ground. They're hard to grow in the ground, but they'll do fine in baskets. They'll do fine on stumps. They will do fine. You can make little chicken wire enclosures that you can sort of nail to the side of the stump. They'll do fine in that stuff. And they're really kind of fun because they're generally small plants, and so they do well. And what was the last part of the question?
About the July blooming auriculatum.
Oh, auriculatum, right. It's you can do it either as a tree or a bush, and the flowers are kind of trumpet shaped, white, fragrant, and the thing has lots of hairs when it is in growth. So it's really kind of a fun plant. And we've had it in the West for over 100 years, and the Brits have made a number of hybrids of it, most of which end up being pretty big plants. But there's one called polar bear that people like.
Mhm.
And then it has a couple relatives. There's one called right on the top, glanduliferum. And glanduliferum blooms even a little later. Its new growth is maroon, and it also is white and fragrant. And the magniflorum are just in bloom now. They're just finishing up. So there are rhodies that it hasn't done anything this whole year until now, and it's putting out its new growth, and the plant manages to get that new growth hardened up in time for winter. It's really pretty amazing.
Okay, and then this, I don't know, this might have to be the last question, I'm sorry to say. This is from Sarah Wallace. She is asking, are there any plants that one should not plant near a rhodie due to potentially harming the health and happiness of the rhodie?
Probably very few. A black walnut comes to mind, but then a black walnut is designed to keep every other plant away from it. So it isn't picking on rhodies. It's you're not going to grow anything else near a black walnut. And we don't exactly grow black walnuts in Western Washington anyway. No,
Right.
rhodies are very good at playing with others. They play well with others. They love a good struggle. They're happy to fight it out with whatever you plant near them, and may the best plant win.
Mhm. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question. Do rhodies need any particular kind of fertilizer, or is just organic mulch good enough?
Rhodies, if you're going to use fertilizer, you want something made for acid-loving plants.
Okay.
Rhodies are surface rooters. They don't put down a tap root, except for our native macrophyllum, which does have a very deep root system. That's how it survives the summers. But the mulch helps. But since they're surface rooters, you don't want to pile it on too thick, or you suffocate those roots. So rhodies actually breathe. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but they need a fairly loose soil. They hate clay. If you have clay, or if you have hard pan, then don't dig a hole. Just plant on top and mound up to the plant. When people say, do I have clay? What do I do? I say, well, lucky you, you never have to dig a hole again. Rhodies they're in a class by themselves. They want that acid. If you use the commercial fertilizer, they want a fertilizer made for rhododendrons because it's for acid-loving plants, camellias, magnolias, those sorts of things.
Well, Bob, this has been so wonderful, so fascinating, and I really, really thank you. All of us thank you for joining us today, and I'm sure a lot of us will be checking out Chimacum Woods in the near future.
Good. Well, that would be wonderful. You're welcome to come. You don't have to buy anything. You're welcome to just enjoy the garden and learn about species rhodies. You might get hooked.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to do this. So I will disappear now. That's okay.
Oh, Bob.
Yes.
Before you leave,
yes.
One question came in. When are you open?
Oh, since we do it by appointment, we really can be, right now we're here 7 days a week pretty much. But no, we reasonable hours.
Yeah.
But weekends are okay. yeah, just call ahead so that we,
Okay,
you're sure
perfect.
you're the only ones
Thank
here.
you, Beth.
Good. All right.
Thank you, Bob.
You're very welcome. I'm going to try and disappear. I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Hmm. Oh, my wife is prompting leave meeting bottom